Chapter 1, The Last Dollar. The rain hammered Seattle's cracked pavement like bullets as Seraphina clutched her last $20 bill, watching her 6-year-old twins, Luna and Orion, press their faces against the pharmacy window. Their fever had spiked again, and the medicine they needed cost $43, $23 more than she had. Her ex-husband's words echoed in her mind. "You'll come crawling back, Sarah. You can't survive without me." 3 months since she'd escaped his fists, and tonight, staring at her sick children, she wondered if he'd been right. A shadow fell across the wet sidewalk behind her. Seraphina spun around to find a man collapsed against the brick wall, blood seeping through his expensive black coat. His skin was pale as moonlight, his breathing shallow and labored. Most people would have walked away. This was downtown Seattle after midnight, after all. But something in his face, even unconscious, reminded her of Orion when he'd been born too early, fighting for every breath. Without thinking, she knelt beside him, her fingers checking for a pulse at his throat. "Mama, what are you doing?" Luna whispered, tugging at Seraphina's rain-soaked jacket. The stranger's pulse was there but weak, like a bird's heartbeat. His lips were blue with cold, and when Seraphina touched his forehead, his skin burned with fever. She knew that look, she'd seen it in the mirror during her darkest nights with Marcus. This man was dying, and he was dying alone. Her children needed medicine, but this stranger needed her more. "We're going to help him," Seraphina said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. She looked down at the $20 bill in her hand, their last hope for the twins' medicine, and made a choice that would change everything. "Luna, Orion, help me get him to the car." The children moved without question, their small hands supporting the stranger's arms as Seraphina wrapped his heavy frame around her shoulders. His coat smelled like pine forests and something wild she couldn't name. As they half-carried, half-dragged him toward her battered Honda, the stranger's eyes fluttered open for just a moment. They were gold, not brown or hazel, but pure liquid gold that seemed to glow in the streetlight. His gaze found hers, and in that instant, Seraphina felt something shift in her chest, like a lock turning in a door she hadn't known existed. Then his eyes closed again, and she told herself she'd imagined the color, the intensity, the way looking at him had made her feel like she was seeing her future. Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in the Philippines, I want to know. Don't just sit back, tell me where in the world you are. Now, let's dive into the story. Seraphina's apartment was barely large enough for 3 people, let alone 4. She cleared the children's toys from the couch and helped the stranger lie down, his long frame hanging over the edges. In the lamplight, she could see him clearly for the first time: sharp cheekbones, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and skin that looked like he hadn't seen sunlight in months. The blood on his coat came from a gash along his ribs, partially hidden by the expensive fabric. When she lifted his shirt to examine the wound, her breath caught. 3 parallel cuts ran deep along his side, like claw marks from some massive animal. "Mama, is he going to die?" Orion asked, his small voice breaking through her shock. Both twins stood in the doorway, their faces flushed with fever but their eyes bright with worry. Seraphina forced herself to focus. Her children needed her steady, not panicked. She'd been a nurse before Marcus had isolated her from everything she loved, before he'd convinced her that her dreams were worthless. Those skills came flooding back now as she assessed the stranger's injuries. The cuts were deep but clean, and his fever felt dangerous but not deadly. "No, baby. We're going to take care of him." Seraphina sent the twins to gather clean towels and the first aid kit she'd learned to keep well stocked during her marriage to Marcus. As she cleaned the stranger's wounds, she noticed other scars across his torso, old ones that spoke of a life filled with violence. Yet his hands, when she checked his pulse again, were gentle-looking, with long fingers that seemed more suited to playing piano than fighting. Every few minutes, he would murmur something in his sleep, words she couldn't understand but that sounded almost like growling. The fever broke near dawn. Seraphina had dozed in the chair beside the couch, the twins curled up on the air mattress they used for movie nights. She woke to find golden eyes watching her, alert and intense. The stranger sat up slowly, wincing as the movement pulled at his bandaged ribs. "You saved my life," he said, and his voice was like whiskey and smoke, with an accent she couldn't place. "Why?" The question hung between them, loaded with something deeper than curiosity. "Because you needed help," Seraphina said simply, though the truth felt more complicated. Something about this man called to a part of her she'd thought Marcus had killed, the part that believed in helping others, in taking risks, in trusting her instincts. The stranger studied her face as if memorizing it, and when his gaze moved to the twins, still sleeping peacefully, his expression softened. "What's your name?" she asked. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, looking directly into her eyes, he said, "Kieran. Kieran Ashworth." Kieran stayed for 3 days, claiming he needed to recover before traveling. Seraphina told herself she was being practical. He clearly had money, judging by his clothes and the expensive watch he wore, and maybe he'd help with rent when he left. But the real reason ran deeper. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Kieran was gentle with the twins, letting them show him their drawings and reading to them in that smoky voice that made even picture books sound like poetry. When Luna asked why his eyes changed color in different light, he said some people were just made different. The twins' fever finally broke on Kieran's second night there, and Seraphina found herself staying up late, talking with him while the children slept. He asked about her life, and somehow she found herself telling him everything, about Marcus's controlling nature, the way he'd systematically destroyed her confidence, the night she'd finally taken the children and run. Kieran listened without judgment, his golden eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "A man who hurts women and children isn't a man at all. He's a coward wearing a mask." "You talk like you know something about dangerous men," Seraphina said, noting how Kieran's jaw tightened when she mentioned Marcus. There was something predatory in the way he moved, even injured, like a wolf pretending to be a house dog. When she'd changed his bandages that morning, she'd noticed the cuts were healing impossibly fast, the edges already knitting together in ways that defied medical explanation. She'd been a nurse long enough to know that wounds like his should take weeks to heal, not days. On the third night, Seraphina woke to find Kieran standing at her window, staring out at the alley behind their building. His posture was tense, alert, like he was listening for something she couldn't hear. "What's wrong?" she whispered, padding barefoot across the cold floor. Kieran turned, and in the dim light from the street lamp, his eyes seemed to glow. "Someone's been watching your building," he said quietly. "How long has your ex-husband been leaving you alone?" The blood in Seraphina's veins turned to ice. "What do you mean?" But even as she asked, she knew. Marcus had been too quiet, too absent from their lives. She'd assumed he'd moved on, found some other woman to control and manipulate. The thought that he might be watching, waiting, planning something, made her stomach clench with familiar fear. Kieran moved closer, and she caught that wild scent again, pine and something untamed that made her think of deep forests and moonlit nights. "Don't worry," he said, his voice carrying a promise that felt absolute. "I won't let him hurt you or your children." Chapter 2, The Hunt Begins. Marcus appeared on Thursday morning like a thundercloud rolling in from the horizon. Seraphina was walking the twins to school when she saw his familiar silhouette leaning against a black SUV across the street. He looked exactly the same, tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of conventional handsomeness that hid his cruelty well. His smile was the one she remembered from their first date, charming and confident, the mask he wore before showing his true face. "Sarah," he called out, crossing the street with the easy swagger of a man who'd never been told no. "We need to talk." "Stay close to me," Seraphina whispered to Luna and Orion, her heart hammering against her ribs. The twins pressed against her sides, instinctively sensing danger. Marcus's eyes were cold and calculating as they swept over the children, then fixed on Seraphina with possessive intensity. "You look thin," he said, reaching out to touch her face. She stepped back, and his expression darkened. 3 months, Sarah. 3 months of this foolishness. The games are over. You're coming home. This is my home, Seraphina said, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. Behind Marcus, she could see other men in the SUV, his brothers, probably, or the friends who'd always encouraged his worst impulses. "I filed for divorce. I meant it." Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "With what money? You can't even afford to keep those kids healthy. I know about the pharmacy, about the bills piling up. You need me, whether you want to admit it or not." The truth in his words stung, but Seraphina lifted her chin. "I'd rather struggle alone than live in fear with you." Something flickered across Marcus's face, surprise, maybe, or respect. For a moment, she saw the man she'd thought she'd married, before the mask had slipped completely. Then his expression hardened again. "You have until Friday to come to your senses," he said, his voice dropping to the tone that used to make her flinch. "After that, I'll stop being nice about this." After Marcus drove away, Seraphina's hands shook so badly she could barely unlock her apartment door. The twins were quiet, picking up on her fear the way children always did. She was reaching for her phone to call the police when she heard footsteps on the fire escape. Kieran appeared at her window, moving with fluid grace despite his recent injuries. When he saw her face, his expression turned deadly. "He found you," he said, and it wasn't a question. The air in the room seemed to shift, becoming charged with something dangerous and wild. "Tell me everything." That evening, Kieran insisted on walking the twins to and from school, his presence both comforting and unnerving. Seraphina watched him interact with Luna and Orion, noting how his entire demeanor changed around them, softer, more patient, protective in a way that went bone deep. When Luna asked him why he had so many scars, he told her they were from protecting people he cared about. "Like a superhero?" Orion asked, his eyes wide with admiration. Kieran's smile was gentle. "Something like that." But when the children weren't around, Kieran was different. Seraphina caught glimpses of something feral beneath his careful control. The way his eyes tracked movement like a predator's, how he positioned himself between her and every door, the growl that rumbled in his chest when she mentioned Marcus's name. "You don't understand what kind of man he is," Kieran said that night, pacing her small living room like a caged animal. "Men like him don't give up. They escalate." "I know exactly what kind of man he is," Seraphina replied, her voice sharper than she'd intended. "I lived with him for 5 years. I know his patterns, his threats, his violence. What I don't know is why you care so much." The words hung between them, loaded with the tension that had been building since the night she'd found him bleeding in the alley. Kieran stopped pacing and looked at her with those impossible golden eyes. "Because you're mine to protect now," he said simply, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. The possessiveness in his words should have frightened her. It sounded too much like Marcus's controlling nature. But coming from Kieran, it felt different. Where Marcus's possession had been about ownership, Kieran's felt like devotion. "I don't need another man telling me what I am," she said quietly. Kieran crossed the room in 3 quick strides, stopping just close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "I'm not telling you what you are," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm telling you what you mean to me." Before Seraphina could respond, the lights in her apartment flickered and went out. Through the darkness, she heard Kieran curse in that language she couldn't identify, the words sounding more like snarls than speech. "Stay with the children," he said, his voice taking on an authority that made her spine straighten. "Don't come out until I tell you it's safe." As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw him move toward the window with inhuman speed and grace. Whatever Kieran Ashworth really was, she was beginning to understand it wasn't entirely human. Chapter 3, The Pack Closes In. The blackout lasted 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. Seraphina huddled with Luna and Orion in their bedroom, listening to sounds from outside that made no sense, something that might have been fighting, or might have been animals, or might have been both. The children pressed against her sides, but strangely, they didn't seem frightened by the inhuman noises echoing through the darkness. Instead, they tilted their heads like they were listening to something she couldn't hear, their eyes reflecting the faint streetlight filtering through the curtains with an almost luminous quality she'd never noticed before. "Mama," Luna whispered, her small hand gripping Seraphina's arm with surprising strength. "The bad men are scared now. Can you smell it?" The question sent ice through Seraphina's veins. Luna had always been intuitive, but this was different. The way she spoke about scent like it carried information, the certainty in her voice about things happening outside their view. Orion nodded solemnly, his 6-year-old face serious beyond his years. "They smell like metal and fear. But Kieran smells like safety. Like home." When the lights flickered back on, Kieran was standing in her living room, his clothes torn and his knuckles bloody. Deep scratches ran along his arms, and there was something wild in his golden eyes that made Seraphina's breath catch. But what shocked her most was the twins' reaction. They didn't cower or cry at the sight of his injuries. Instead, they moved toward him with an eagerness that defied logic, their small bodies drawn to him like iron filings to a magnet. "It's handled," he said, but his eyes kept darting to the windows as if expecting another attack. "What's handled?" Seraphina demanded, stepping out of the bedroom once she was sure the twins were behind her. But Luna and Orion slipped around her, rushing to Kieran's side with a fearlessness that made her heart race. They examined his wounds with the clinical interest of children who had seen violence before, their small hands gentle as they touched the scratches along his arms. "You're hurt," Orion said matter-of-factly. "But you're healing fast. Faster than normal people do." The observation was delivered with such casual acceptance that Seraphina felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Who were you fighting? What's really going on?" Kieran ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it more disheveled than usual. Up close, she could see scratches along his neck that looked fresh, and when he moved, she caught that wild scent again, stronger now, mixed with something that smelled like danger and moonlight. But underneath that wild musk was something else, something that made the twins lean closer to him with expressions of recognition she couldn't understand. "People who want to hurt you," he said finally, his eyes flicking meaningfully toward Luna and Orion. "People who think they can use you to get to me." "Use me how? Get to you why?" Seraphina's voice rose with frustration and fear, but she kept it low enough not to wake the neighbors. The twins had settled on either side of Kieran on the couch, their small bodies radiating a calm that seemed impossible given the circumstances. Luna was tracing the scratches on his arm with one finger, her touch seeming to ease his tension in ways that defied medical explanation. "Kieran, I saved your life, I've welcomed you into my home, I've let you near my children. I deserve the truth." For a moment, she thought he would deflect again, give her another non-answer wrapped in cryptic warnings. But then his gaze moved to the twins, and something in his expression shifted, surprise, recognition, and what looked like dawning understanding. "Seraphina," he said slowly, his voice careful and controlled. "Tell me about their father. Their real father." The question hit her like a physical blow, dredging up memories she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself they weren't real. What does that have to do with anything? But even as she asked, pieces were clicking together in her mind, the twins' unusual behavior, their instant connection to Kieran, the way they seemed to sense things no normal children should be able to perceive. "Their father died before they were born," she said quietly. "A car accident, or at least that's what the police told me. But there were things about that night that never made sense." Kieran's expression grew grim. "What kind of things?" Luna and Orion had gone very still beside him, their large eyes fixed on their mother with an intensity that seemed far too mature for their age. Seraphina found herself remembering details she'd pushed aside, the way David's body had been found torn apart, the strange witnesses who'd claimed to see massive dogs in the area, the investigators who'd asked odd questions about David's habits and associations before abruptly closing the case. The investigators said it was a car accident, but David's body was. She struggled to find words that wouldn't traumatize her children, but Luna spoke up in her clear, matter-of-fact voice. "Mama, we know Daddy was different. We've always known." The simple statement sent shock waves through Seraphina's carefully constructed understanding of her life. "What do you mean, baby?" she asked, kneeling down to Luna's eye level. "We dream about him sometimes," Orion explained, his small hand finding his sister's. "He has golden eyes like Kieran, and he runs through forests on 4 legs. He tells us we're special, that we have gifts that will come when we're ready." The twins spoke with such certainty about things that should have been impossible that Seraphina felt reality shifting around her like quicksand. Kieran was studying the children with new eyes, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of terrible understanding. "Seraphina, werewolf genetics are dominant. If David was one of us, then Luna and Orion." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. The implications crashed over her like a tsunami, everything about her children's unusual behavior, their advanced intuition, their fearlessness around Kieran's predatory nature suddenly made horrifying sense. "That's impossible," she whispered, but even as she said it, she was remembering more signs she'd dismissed. The way the twins could find their way home from anywhere, even in complete darkness. How they always seemed to know when storms were coming hours before the weather reports. The fact that they'd never been seriously ill, healing from cuts and bruises with remarkable speed. They're just children. Normal children. "Look at them, Seraphina," Kieran said gently. "Really look at them." She did, and for the first time, she saw what he was seeing. The way they held themselves with unconscious grace, their senses clearly sharper than any human child should be. The golden flecks in their eyes that she'd always thought were just unusual coloring. The strength in their small bodies that let them keep up with children twice their age. The fevers they'd been having, Kieran continued softly. They weren't sick. They were beginning to change. Change into what? But she already knew the answer, had known it on some deep, instinctual level since the night she'd found Kieran bleeding in the alley. The twins were werewolves, or would be, when their abilities fully manifested. Her babies, her precious normal human children, were something else entirely. "When?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Usually around puberty," Kieran explained, his voice gentle but honest. "But extreme stress or proximity to other wolves can trigger early manifestations. That's why the fever started after I arrived. My presence is accelerating their natural development." He looked at Luna and Orion with something like awe. "They're strong, Seraphina. Stronger than most adult wolves I've met. Their father must have been from a very powerful bloodline." Before Seraphina could process this revelation fully, her phone buzzed with a text message. Marcus's name on the screen made her blood run cold, but it was the message itself that made her knees weak. "I know what those children really are now. Your new boyfriend can't protect you from everyone. Tomorrow night. Come alone, or I'll make sure Luna and Orion learn what happens to little wolves who forget their place." The phone slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. Kieran read the message over her shoulder, and the sound that came from his throat was definitely not human. But what terrified Seraphina more was the way the twins responded. Both children's eyes flashed with golden light, and low growls rumbled from their small chests. For a moment, they looked less like 6-year-old children and more like predators preparing to defend their territory. "How does Marcus know?" Seraphina asked, her voice shaking with rage and fear. "Because he's been watching you for far longer than you realize," Kieran said grimly. "And he's not working alone. His phone rang, and he answered it with sharp efficiency. "What do you have for me, Raven?" The voice on the other end was female, urgent, and spoke in rapid-fire sentences that Seraphina couldn't quite catch. But she could see Kieran's expression growing darker with each word. "How long has this been going on? Are you certain?" More urgent whispers from the phone. "Double the perimeter. No one gets close to this building." When he hung up, Kieran's face was grim. "My PAC's intelligence network just uncovered something disturbing. Marcus Caldwell isn't just your abusive ex-husband, he's been working with a group called the Iron Covenant for the past 3 years. They're supernatural hunters who specialize in tracking and eliminating werewolf bloodlines." The words hit Seraphina like physical blows, each revelation more horrifying than the last. "You're saying he knew about David? About what the twins are?" The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Marcus's sudden interest in her after David's death, his controlling behavior that had isolated her from friends and family, his uncanny ability to always know where she was and what she was doing. "He married me to get close to them. To use them as bait. The Iron Covenant has been hunting David's bloodline for decades," Kieran confirmed, his voice heavy with anger. "Your late husband came from one of the oldest werewolf families in North America. When he was killed, they thought the line had ended. But then Marcus reported unusual behavior in the twins, and they realized the children had inherited their father's gifts." He moved closer to Seraphina, his presence both protective and predatory. "They've been waiting for the children's abilities to manifest so they could study them, learn how to better hunt our kind." "Study them?" Seraphina's voice cracked with maternal fury. "They want to experiment on my babies?" The protective rage that surged through her felt like fire in her veins, and for a moment, she understood the predatory fury she saw in Kieran's eyes. "Over my dead body." "That was always the plan," Kieran said grimly. "Marcus was supposed to deliver all 3 of you alive. Because you might carry dormant genetics, and the children because of their active werewolf heritage. When you left him, it complicated their timeline, but it also gave them an opportunity. They knew another werewolf would eventually be drawn to protect the children. It's instinctive for our kind to safeguard young wolves, especially orphaned ones." The full scope of the conspiracy was staggering. "You think they planned for you to find us?" Seraphina asked, her mind reeling. But Kieran shook his head, his expression thoughtful. "No, that was genuine coincidence, or fate, depending on your perspective. But they'd been tracking my movements since I arrived in Seattle. The attack on my pack, the silver bullets, the betrayal, it was all designed to flush me out, make me vulnerable so they could follow me to you." Luna and Orion had been listening to this exchange with the serious attention of children who understood they were hearing about their own fate. Now Luna spoke up, her young voice carrying a wisdom that seemed far beyond her 6 years. "Mama, we won't let the bad men take us. We're stronger than they think." As she spoke, her eyes flickered with golden light, and Seraphina could swear she saw the shadow of fangs behind her daughter's baby teeth. "The children are right," Kieran said, kneeling down to their level. "You're both incredibly strong, and your gifts are manifesting much faster than normal. But strength alone won't be enough against the Iron Covenant. They have weapons designed specifically to hurt our kind, and they know all our weaknesses." He looked seriously at both twins. "That's why you need to learn control, and fast. Can you feel the wolf inside you? The part that wants to growl and bite when you're angry?" Both children nodded solemnly. "It's been getting stronger since you came," Orion admitted. "Especially when we're scared or when someone threatens Mama. Sometimes I want to change into something bigger, something with teeth and claws that could protect her properly." The casual way he spoke about partial transformation sent chills down Seraphina's spine. "That instinct is good," Kieran assured him. "But you have to learn when to listen to it and when to stay human. The Iron Covenant is counting on you to lose control, to shift when there are witnesses or cameras around. Once the human world knows werewolves exist, they can hunt us openly instead of hiding in the shadows. He stood, his expression growing strategic. We have until tomorrow night to prepare, and there's a lot you need to learn. What kind of preparation? Seraphina asked, though she was beginning to suspect she wouldn't like the answer. Kieran's smile was sharp, predatory, and filled with promise. We're going to teach the twins how to be the weapons their father's bloodline was meant to create. And we're going to show Marcus and his hunters what happens when they threaten a werewolf pack's young. The sounds from outside were growing louder. Footsteps, low voices, the barely audible whisper of people moving with practiced stealth. Kieran's pack was taking positions around the building, forming a protective perimeter that would keep them safe through the night. They're here, he said simply. My wolves. They'll keep watch while we plan our next move. As if summoned by his words, there was a soft knock at the fire escape window. Kieran opened it to admit a woman who moved with the same predatory grace Seraphina was beginning to recognize. She was tall, lean, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. This is Raven, Kieran said. My second-in-command and the pack's intelligence specialist. Raven studied Luna and Orion with professional interest, her nostrils flaring slightly as she scented them. David Blackwood's children, she said with certainty. I can smell his bloodline on them. Strong genetics, they'll be formidable once they learn control. She turned to Seraphina with respectful attention. Ma'am, we've been tracking the Iron Covenant's movements for the past 6 hours. They have teams positioned throughout the city, but they're waiting for something. Waiting for what? Seraphina asked, though she suspected she already knew. Raven's expression was grim. For the children to shift. They have surveillance equipment that can detect the electromagnetic signature of a werewolf transformation. Once they confirm that Luna and Orion are active shapeshifters, they'll move to capture all of you. Then we make sure they don't shift, Seraphina said firmly. But Kieran shook his head, his expression thoughtful. No, we use their expectations against them. The Iron Covenant thinks they're hunting confused, frightened children who don't understand their own nature. They have no idea what they're actually walking into. He doesn't know what he's threatening, Kieran continued, his voice dropping to a register that made the windows vibrate. Men like your ex-husband think violence makes them apex predators. They have no idea what real predators look like. As he spoke, his eyes began to glow with that golden light, and Seraphina swore she could see his teeth growing sharper. But now she understood why the twins weren't afraid. They recognized him as pack, as family, as safety. The rational part of her mind screamed that she should be terrified, that she should grab her children and run as far and fast as possible. But a deeper instinct, something primal and ancient that might have been her own dormant genetics responding to the truth, told her that Kieran wasn't the danger she needed to fear. The real danger was Marcus and his hunters, who wanted to cage her children like animals and study them like specimens. What are you? She whispered, though part of her already knew the answer. But now the question carried different weight, not fear of the unknown, but a mother's need to understand the world her children would inherit. Kieran looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him weighing truth against safety, love against fear. But when his gaze moved to Luna and Orion, his decision was made. I'm the alpha of the Pacific Northwest Pack, he said quietly. And your ex-husband just declared war on a werewolf. He knelt down between the twins, placing a gentle hand on each of their shoulders. But more importantly, I'm going to be the one who teaches these two incredible children how to be the wolves they were born to be. Luna and Orion looked up at him with shining eyes, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Seraphina saw her children truly smile. They weren't afraid of what they were becoming, they were excited. And as she watched Kieran begin to explain the basics of scent tracking to her eager 6-year-olds, Seraphina realized that maybe, just maybe, this supernatural revelation wasn't the end of their normal life. Maybe it was the beginning of the extraordinary one they were always meant to have. Chapter 4, The Alpha's Truth. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge Seraphina could either cross or burn. Werewolf. The rational part of her mind rejected it immediately. Werewolves were fiction, mythology, special effects in movies. But as she looked at Kieran, really looked at him, pieces began falling into place. The impossible healing speed, the predatory grace, the way his eyes glowed in certain light, the wild scent that clung to his skin. And now, knowing what Luna and Orion truly were, the way he'd connected with them so instantly made terrifying sense. "Prove it," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Kieran's transformation wasn't the violent, painful thing she'd seen in horror movies. It was fluid, natural, like watching water change from liquid to vapor. His bones shifted beneath his skin, his muscles expanded, and thick dark fur sprouted along his arms and neck. His face elongated slightly, his teeth sharpened to points, and his eyes blazed with golden fire. But it was still recognizably Kieran, still the man who read bedtime stories to her children and made her feel safe for the first time in years. Luna and Orion watched from the couch with rapt attention, no fear in their young faces, only recognition and wonder. When he spoke, his voice was deeper, rougher, but gentle. "This is who I am, Seraphina. This is what I am." As he shifted back to human form, Seraphina found herself taking a step closer rather than backing away. The twins clapped their hands softly, as if they'd just witnessed their favorite magic trick. But Seraphina's mind was racing with implications that went far beyond the supernatural revelation. Something about the timing, about how perfectly everything had aligned, nagged at her consciousness. "The night I found you," she said slowly, understanding dawning but bringing with it new questions. "You weren't just injured. You were shot with something meant to kill werewolves." Kieran nodded, but there was something in his expression, a flicker of hesitation that hadn't been there before. "Silver bullets, blessed by someone who knows our weaknesses. My pack had been betrayed by someone we trusted. I barely escaped." But even as he spoke, Seraphina's mind was analyzing details that hadn't made sense at the time. The way he'd been positioned in that alley, not hidden or seeking shelter, but in plain sight where anyone walking to the pharmacy would find him. How his injuries, severe as they looked, had been perfectly placed to appear life-threatening without actually hitting vital organs. The expensive clothes that marked him as someone important, someone who wouldn't normally be found bleeding in downtown Seattle's grimiest neighborhood. "Kieran," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge of suspicion. "How did you end up in that specific alley? Out of all the places in Seattle you could have collapsed, how did you end up exactly where I'd have to pass to get medicine for my children?" The question hung between them like an accusation, and she saw something shift in his golden eyes. Not guilt, exactly, but the look of someone whose carefully laid plans were unraveling. Raven, who had been quietly observing from her position by the window, cleared her throat softly. "Alpha," she said, her voice carrying a warning. "Perhaps it's time." Kieran shot her a sharp look, but Seraphina was already connecting dots that painted a very different picture of their first meeting. "Time for what?" she demanded, maternal protective instincts flaring. "What aren't you telling me?" Kieran ran a hand through his dark hair, the gesture she'd come to recognize as his tell when he was weighing difficult truths. "The night you found me wasn't an accident, Seraphina. But not for the reasons you're thinking." He moved to the window, staring out at the city lights as if gathering courage from the darkness. 3 weeks before we met, my pack's intelligence network intercepted communications from the Iron Covenant. They were planning to move on a high-value target in Seattle, a woman with 2 children who carried dormant supernatural genetics. The words hit Seraphina like physical blows. "You knew about me before that night. You knew what Marcus was planning." It wasn't a question. Kieran turned from the window, his expression intense and unapologetic. "We knew someone matching your description was in danger. We knew the Iron Covenant had an inside man, your ex-husband, who was feeding them information about unusual children in the area. What we didn't know was your exact identity or location." So you what? Staged your own assassination attempt to get close to me? Seraphina's voice rose with anger and betrayal. But underneath the fury was something else, hurt that their meeting, which had felt so fateful and meaningful, had been nothing more than calculated manipulation. You let me think I was saving your life when really you were just using me? It wasn't supposed to happen that way, Kieran said urgently, stepping toward her. The plan was simple reconnaissance. I was supposed to get injured badly enough to need basic medical attention, find out if you were the target, and then extract you and the children safely if necessary. I had backup position throughout the neighborhood, medical supplies hidden nearby. It was supposed to be controlled. But? Seraphina prompted, because there was clearly more to the story. Raven answered when Kieran hesitated. But the Iron Covenant had been tracking the Alpha's movements. They knew he was in Seattle, and they'd set their own trap. The silver bullets were real, blessed with enough sacred power to actually kill him. What was supposed to be a staged injury became a genuine assassination attempt. I underestimated them, Kieran admitted, his voice heavy with self-recrimination. I thought I was hunting them, but they were hunting me. When their attack came, I was already weakened from the fake injuries I'd given myself. The silver poisoning was real, the blood loss was real, and I was genuinely dying when you found me. His golden eyes met hers with desperate honesty. Your compassion, your refusal to leave a stranger to die, that saved my life in ways my pack never could have planned for. Seraphina sank into her chair, trying to process the revelation that their entire relationship had begun with deception. So everything, bringing you here, caring for you, the way you connected with my children, it was all part of some elaborate supernatural rescue mission? The hurt in her voice made Kieran flinch as if she'd struck him. No, he said firmly, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level. Seraphina, look at me. The plan was to verify your identity and extract you to safety. I expected basic first aid, maybe a trip to a hospital emergency room. I never expected you to take me home, to trust me with your children, to care for me like. He struggled for words. Like I mattered to you as a person, not just as someone who needed help. The mate bond, she said quietly, understanding beginning to dawn. You felt it that first night, didn't you? Even before you were supposed to. Kieran nodded, his expression vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. The moment our eyes met in that alley, everything changed. Suddenly it wasn't about the mission anymore, it was about you. About the way you looked at me like I was worth saving, worth the risk. Luna spoke up from the couch, her young voice cutting through the emotional tension. Mama, he loves us. I can smell it on him, love and protection and something that feels like forever. The simple statement from her 6-year-old daughter, delivered with the matter-of-fact certainty that came from enhanced werewolf senses, made Seraphina's breath catch. The twins, she said, looking at Kieran with new understanding. You knew what they were before I did. You've been teaching them, preparing them, because you knew this day would come. Kieran nodded, his expression serious. Children with their bloodline don't stay hidden forever. Their abilities were going to manifest whether I was here or not. At least this way, they have guidance, protection, a pack to help them understand what they're becoming. Raven approached quietly, her movement drawing Seraphina's attention. Ma'am, if I may, the Alpha's methods were unorthodox, but his intentions were pure. The Iron Covenant has taken 17 werewolf children in the past 5 years. None of them have ever been recovered. The stark statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Your twins would have been number 18 and 19 if we hadn't intervened. 17 children, Seraphina repeated, her voice hollow with horror. What happened to them? But the look that passed between Kieran and Raven told her everything she needed to know. The Iron Covenant wasn't just hunting werewolves, they were collecting them, studying them, probably experimenting on them. Her babies had been marked for a fate worse than death. This is bigger than just Marcus's obsession with controlling me, she said, the pieces finally falling into place. He's not just an abusive ex-husband, he's part of something organized, something that's been hunting supernatural children for years. Kieran nodded grimly. The Iron Covenant has cells in every major city. They recruit human assets, usually men with authority issues and control problems, to identify potential targets in their communities. Men like Marcus, Seraphina said, understanding flooding through her. That's why he was so interested in the twins' development, why he asked so many questions about their abilities and instincts. I thought he was just being a controlling stepfather, but he was gathering intelligence. The betrayal cut deeper than his physical abuse ever had. Marcus had been planning to sell her children to monsters. The night you left him was what triggered the timeline acceleration, Raven explained. The Iron Covenant knew the children were manifesting, but they needed physical access to confirm their supernatural status. When you removed them from Marcus's direct control, it forced them to move to more aggressive tactics. She gestured toward her phone. The surveillance we've detected, the teams positioned around the city, they're not just here for you anymore. They're here to capture active werewolf children. Orion, who had been listening with the serious attention of a child who understood his life was being discussed, spoke up quietly. Are they going to hurt us like they hurt our real daddy? The question, delivered in such a small voice, made Kieran's expression turn murderous. No, he said with absolute certainty. I promise you, little wolf, no one will ever hurt you or your sister. Not while I'm alive to prevent it. But you lied to us, Seraphina said, though the anger in her voice was fading into something more complex. You manipulated our first meeting, orchestrated this entire situation. How do I know anything you've said or done since then has been real? Kieran stood slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. Because I'm about to tell you something that could destroy everything I've worked for, everything my pack has built. He began pacing again, that restless energy she'd come to associate with difficult revelations. The Iron Covenant isn't the only organization hunting supernatural beings. There's another group, older, more powerful, supposedly on our side. They call themselves the Council of Guardians, and they've been protecting werewolf communities for centuries. His expression grew troubled. They're the ones who gave me the intelligence about you and the children. They're the ones who suggested the infiltration plan. Suggested or ordered? Seraphina asked, her instincts telling her there was more to this story. Kieran's hesitation confirmed her suspicions. The council doesn't make suggestions to pack alphas, he admitted. They give directives. And their directive was clear: extract the children, eliminate the human threats, and bring the surviving bloodline into protective custody. Protective custody, Seraphina repeated, her voice flat. You mean take my children away from me? The words hung in the air like a sword ready to fall. That was their plan, wasn't it? Save Luna and Orion from the Iron Covenant by removing them from their human mother and placing them with a proper werewolf family. It's standard protocol for orphaned werewolf children, Raven said quietly, her voice carefully neutral. Human parents are considered a security risk, unable to properly prepare the children for supernatural threats or teach them control of their abilities. She paused meaningfully. But the Alpha refused those orders. Seraphina looked at Kieran with new eyes, understanding the true scope of what he'd risked for her family. You went against your supernatural superiors to keep us together. It wasn't a question. That's why you've been so determined to prove that Luna and Orion can learn control while staying with me. That's why you've been teaching me about the supernatural world instead of just taking them away. The mate bond changes everything, Kieran said simply. Once I recognized you as my destined partner, separating you from your children became impossible. But convincing the council that a human mother can successfully raise werewolf children. He shook his head. That's a battle I'm still fighting. A battle you're fighting alone, Seraphina realized. Your pack, the other alphas, they think you've lost your mind, don't they? Risking everything for a human woman and her half-breed children. The harsh terminology made her flinch, but she needed to understand the full scope of what Kieran was facing. Some of them do, he admitted. But others are starting to see the strength in your family, the potential for a new kind of pack structure. Luna and Orion are already showing abilities beyond their age level, and you. He paused, studying her face. You've adapted to supernatural realities faster than most humans could handle. You're not the liability the council believes you to be. But I'm still human, Seraphina pointed out. Still the weak link in this supernatural chain. Kieran moved closer, his expression intense. Humanity isn't weakness, Seraphina. It's perspective. It's compassion. It's the ability to see beyond pack politics and ancient grudges to what really matters. His hands found hers, warm and steady. My pack is stronger because of your influence, not weaker. The night I found you, she said, pieces still clicking together. When you saw how I cared for you, how the twins responded to you, that's when you decided to go against the council's orders, isn't it? Kieran nodded. I'd never seen children adapt so quickly to supernatural realities, or a human mother fight so fiercely to protect what she didn't understand. You proved that love transcends species boundaries. But now we're all in danger, Seraphina said, understanding the full scope of their situation. The Iron Covenant wants to capture us, the Council wants to separate us, and Marcus is caught in the middle with his own agenda. She looked at her children, still sitting calmly on the couch as if discussions of supernatural politics were normal family conversations. What happens tomorrow night? Tomorrow night, we end this, Kieran said, his voice carrying the authority of an alpha making a final decision. Marcus and the Iron Covenant want a confrontation, so we'll give them one. But it won't be the helpless victims they're expecting. His eyes blazed with golden fire. They're about to learn what happens when someone threatens a werewolf pack's family. Your pack, Seraphina said, testing the words. You keep saying that, but I'm not a werewolf. The children are only half-blooded. Are we really pack, or are we just humans under your protection? The question mattered more than she'd expected it to. After a lifetime of feeling like she didn't belong anywhere, the idea of having a true family, a real place in the world, was both terrifying and desperately appealing. Pack isn't about blood purity, Raven said softly. It's about loyalty, protection, and shared purpose. You've already proven yourself worthy of pack membership, the way you saved our alpha, the way you've adapted to protect your children, the strength you've shown in the face of impossible circumstances. She smiled slightly. Most werewolves would have run screaming by now. The mate bond makes you pack by default, Kieran explained. But even without that connection, you've earned your place among us. Luna and Orion certainly have. They're some of the strongest young wolves I've ever encountered. He looked at the twins with obvious pride. Their father's bloodline combined with their human upbringing has created something unique and powerful. So what happens after tomorrow night? Seraphina asked. Assuming we survive whatever confrontation you're planning, what kind of life are we looking at? Constantly running from supernatural threats? Hiding from human authorities? Never having a normal moment again? The questions poured out of her, all the fears she'd been suppressing since learning the truth about her children. I won't lie to you, Kieran said honestly. Life in the supernatural world is dangerous. There will always be threats, always be people who want to use or hurt those with power. But you won't face them alone anymore. He gestured around the room, encompassing Raven and the invisible presence of his pack members positioned throughout the building. You'll have a family that spans continents, allies who would die to protect you, and children who will grow up knowing exactly how strong and valuable they are. And what about us? The question slipped out before Seraphina could stop it, but she didn't take it back. What about this mate bond you keep mentioning? What does that mean for two people who met under such complicated circumstances? Kieran's expression grew soft, vulnerable in a way that made her heart skip beats. It means that despite the deception that brought us together, despite the dangers surrounding us, despite every logical reason why this shouldn't work. We're meant to be together, he said simply. The mate bond doesn't lie, doesn't manipulate, doesn't calculate advantages. It simply recognizes truth. His golden eyes held hers steadily. I love you, Seraphina. Not because of some supernatural compulsion, but because of who you are, how you love your children, the strength you've shown in impossible circumstances. I should leave, she said quietly, testing the words even as her heart rejected them. Take Luna and Orion somewhere safe, start over again. But even as she spoke, she knew it was impossible. There was nowhere far enough to run from the Iron Covenant, nowhere safe enough to hide from the Council of Guardians. And more than that, looking at her children's faces as they watched Kieran, she could see they'd already chosen their pack. No. The word came out with such authority that Seraphina felt it in her bones. Running from Marcus only taught him that threats work. Running from my enemies will teach them the same lesson. Kieran cupped her face in his hands, his touch warm and solid and real. I won't let anyone hurt you or your children. Not Marcus, not rival wolves, not the Iron Covenant, not even the Council of Guardians. His golden eyes burned with promise and determination, and for the first time since this supernatural nightmare began, Seraphina felt something like hope stirring in her chest. You're under my protection now, he continued, his voice carrying the weight of an alpha's vow. Tomorrow night, when Marcus expects you to come crawling back, he's going to learn what happens when someone threatens my mate. As if summoned by his words, Luna and Orion slipped off the couch and moved to stand beside their mother, their small hands finding hers with unconscious trust. We choose you, Luna said simply, her young voice carrying certainty that seemed far beyond her 6 years. We choose this pack, this family, this life. Orion nodded solemnly. The wolf inside us knows where we belong. Looking at her children's faces, seeing the peace and rightness in their expressions, Seraphina made her choice. Then we stay, she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected. We fight. We become the family we were meant to be. And as Kieran's arms closed around her and the twins, as Raven's smile of approval warmed the room, Seraphina realized that sometimes the most dangerous path was also the one that led home. Chapter 5, The Mate Bond. Mate? The word escaped Seraphina's lips in a whisper. She'd heard it in nature documentaries, understood it intellectually, but hearing Kieran say it about her made something deep in her chest flutter to life. Is that what this is? This feeling I get when you're near, like I can breathe properly for the first time? Kieran's hands were still cupping her face, his thumbs tracing gentle circles along her cheekbones. But there was something in his expression, a hesitation, a weight of knowledge that made her pulse quicken with apprehension. The mate bond is sacred among our kind, he said carefully, his golden eyes searching her face as if looking for something specific. It means you're my equal, my partner, the other half of my soul. The way he emphasized equal sent a chill down Seraphina's spine. There was meaning buried in that word, implications she wasn't ready to face. But Seraphina, there's something about the mate bond you need to understand, something that changes everything we thought we knew about you. But I'm human, she protested, even as her body leaned into his touch. How can a human be mated to a werewolf? Kieran's smile was soft but tinged with something that looked like pity. That's just it, love. You can't be. The simple statement hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs. The moon doesn't bond unequal souls. An alpha werewolf can only be mated to another supernatural being of equal power and standing. Seraphina pulled back from his touch, her mind reeling. What are you saying? That this bond you're talking about is impossible? That what we're feeling isn't real? But even as she spoke, pieces were clicking together in her mind, things that had never made sense about her life, about her family, about the way the world had always felt slightly wrong around the edges. I'm saying that everything you thought you knew about yourself is a lie, Kieran said gently, his voice carrying the weight of revelation. Seraphina, you're not human. You never were. He gestured to Raven, who approached with a tablet in her hands. Show her, he said quietly. Show her what we discovered. Raven's fingers moved across the screen, pulling up documents that looked old and official. 3 weeks ago, when we first identified you as a potential target, I ran your DNA through our supernatural databases. What I found shouldn't have been possible. She turned the tablet towards Seraphina, showing her a family tree that stretched back centuries. Seraphina Blackthorn, not Caldwell, not whatever name your adoptive parents gave you. You're the last surviving member of the Blackthorn Lycan dynasty. The name hit Seraphina like a lightning strike, triggering memories she'd thought were childhood fantasies. Dreams of running through moonlit forests on 4 legs, of golden eyes watching her from shadows, of a woman with silver hair singing lullabies in a language she didn't recognize. That's impossible, she whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. My parents were Robert and Helen Morrison. They were teachers, normal people who died in a car accident when I was 16. Robert and Helen Morrison were guardians, Kieran said softly. Humans who dedicated their lives to protecting supernatural bloodlines. They weren't your parents, Seraphina, they were your protectors, assigned to keep you safe until your abilities manifested. He pulled up another document on the tablet, this one showing official guardian records. Your real parents were Adrian and Celestine Blackthorn, the last ruling alpha pair of the Northern Territories pack. Were, Seraphina repeated, focusing on the past tense. What happened to them? But she could see the answer in Kieran's expression before he spoke. They were assassinated when you were 2 years old. The Iron Covenant's predecessor organization, the Silver Inquisition, had been hunting Lycan royalty for decades. Your parents managed to get you to safety before they were killed, but the entire Blackthorn bloodline was believed to have been wiped out. The room was spinning around Seraphina as the implications crashed over her. Lycan royalty, she said slowly, tasting the words. What does that even mean? Raven answered, her voice respectful in a way it hadn't been before. It means you're not just werewolf nobility, you're the genetic inheritor of powers that haven't been seen in over 3 centuries. Lycan royals don't just shift between human and wolf forms. They can take on aspects of other supernatural creatures, enhance strength, speed, healing abilities that border on miraculous. That's why your touch could heal me so effectively the night we met, Kieran added, understanding dawning in his expression. I thought it was just the mate bond amplifying your human compassion, but it was actually royal Lycan healing abilities responding to your mate's need. He looked at her with something approaching awe. Do you have any idea how powerful you are, Seraphina? I'm not powerful, she protested, looking down at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. I'm a struggling single mother who couldn't even protect her children from her abusive ex-husband. I can barely pay rent, let alone command supernatural forces. But even as she spoke, she was remembering moments that had never quite made sense, times when her touch had seemed to ease pain beyond what medicine could explain, when she'd known things she shouldn't have been able to know, when her instincts had saved her from dangers she couldn't even identify. Your abilities have been dormant, Raven explained, pulling up more research on the tablet. Lycan royal powers typically manifest during periods of extreme emotional stress or when exposed to high concentrations of supernatural energy. Living with the Morrisons, isolated from the supernatural world, kept your abilities suppressed. But being around Kieran, discovering the truth about Luna and Orion, that's been triggering your awakening. The night you saved me, Kieran said, his voice filled with wonder, I could feel power radiating from you. I thought it was just the strength of your spirit, but it was actually royal Lycan energy responding to protect what the bloodline recognized as its mate. His golden eyes met hers with new understanding. That's why the healing was so effective, why the mate bond formed so quickly and completely. Seraphina stood abruptly, pacing to the window as her mind struggled to process this revelation. If this is true, if I'm really this Lycan royal you're talking about, then why don't I remember anything? Why don't I have access to these supposed powers? She turned back to face them, desperation creeping into her voice. Why do I feel exactly the same as I always have? Because you were hidden so well that even you didn't know what you were, Kieran said gently. The Morrisons did their job perfectly. They raised you to be completely human, to never question your origins or access your supernatural heritage. It was the only way to keep you safe from those who would have killed you for your bloodline. But Marcus found me anyway, Seraphina said, pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. How did an abusive human man end up connected to supernatural hunters if this was all supposed to be secret? Raven's expression grew grim as she pulled up another file. Because you were never as hidden as the Guardians believed. The Iron Covenant has been tracking Blackthorn descendants for decades, following bloodline markers and genetic signatures. Marcus wasn't randomly drawn to you, Kieran continued, his voice heavy with anger. He was recruited specifically because of his proximity to you. The Iron Covenant identified you as a potential Blackthorn heir shortly after you started dating him. They spent years grooming him, feeding his controlling tendencies, encouraging his isolation tactics, all to keep you under surveillance while they verified your identity. The betrayal cut deeper than any physical abuse Marcus had ever inflicted. My entire marriage was a supernatural surveillance operation, Seraphina said, her voice flat with shock. 5 years of my life, the father I thought my children had, all of it was fake. She thought about David, Luna and Orion's real father, and felt another piece click into place. David wasn't random either, was he? A werewolf doesn't just happen to meet and fall in love with a dormant Lycan royal. David Blackwood was assigned as your protector after the Morrisons died, Raven confirmed quietly. But his feelings for you became genuine, and when he realized you were carrying his children, he went rogue from his guardian duties to try to build a real life with you. Her expression softened with sympathy. He was planning to tell you everything, about himself, about your heritage, about what your children would become. The Iron Covenant killed him before he could. And then they maneuvered Marcus into my life to pick up where David left off, Seraphina said, the full scope of the conspiracy becoming clear. How long have they been watching me? How much of my life has been real versus manufactured? The questions poured out of her, each one adding to the sense that everything she believed about herself was crumbling. The surveillance started when you were 18, Kieran said gently. After the Morrisons died and you aged out of guardian protection. But Seraphina, your feelings, your choices, your love for your children, that's all real. The circumstances may have been manipulated, but who you are as a person, that's entirely your own. Luna spoke up from the couch, her young voice cutting through the adult conversation. Mama, I can smell the wolf in you now. It's been sleeping, but it's starting to wake up. The simple observation from her 6-year-old daughter, delivered with the matter-of-fact certainty that came from enhanced werewolf senses, made Seraphina's breath catch. Ever since Kieran came, you smell more like pack, more like family. The children, Seraphina said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. If I'm Lycan royalty and their father was a powerful werewolf, then Luna and Orion aren't just half-bloods. They're heirs to 2 of the most powerful supernatural bloodlines in North America, Raven finished. Their combination of royal Lycan and ancient werewolf genetics makes them potentially the strongest shapeshifters born in the last 5 centuries. That's why the Iron Covenant wants them so badly, Kieran added, his expression fierce with protective rage. And why the Council of Guardians wants to separate them from you. Children with that much power, raised outside traditional pack structures, represent either the greatest opportunity or the greatest threat the supernatural world has seen in generations. Seraphina looked at her children, her impossibly strong, intuitive, fearless children, and felt a surge of maternal protectiveness that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than human instinct. They want to use them, she said, her voice carrying a new edge of authority that made Raven straighten unconsciously. Both sides. The Iron Covenant wants to study them, and your council wants to control them. Not if I have anything to say about it, Kieran said firmly. Royal Lycan or not, you're their mother, and that bond is sacred in supernatural law. No one can take them from you without your consent. His golden eyes blazed with determination. But now that we know what you are, we can teach you to access your abilities, help you become strong enough to protect them yourself. How? Seraphina asked, looking down at her hands again. I don't feel any different than I did an hour ago. I don't feel like supernatural royalty. I feel like a confused single mother who's in way over her head. But even as she spoke, she could feel something stirring in her chest, a warmth that hadn't been there before, like embers being fanned to life. The awakening process is gradual, Raven explained. Think about the past week. Have you noticed anything different about yourself? Increased strength, sharper senses, instincts that seem to come from nowhere? As she spoke, Seraphina found herself remembering moments she'd dismissed as adrenaline or maternal instinct, lifting furniture that should have been too heavy, hearing conversations through walls, knowing things about people just by looking at them. The night Marcus threatened the children through that text message, Seraphina said slowly, I felt something change inside me. Like rage, but bigger, more primal. She looked at Kieran with new understanding. I wanted to hurt him in ways that went beyond human anger. I wanted to hunt him down and make him pay with more than just legal consequences. That was your Lycan nature responding to a threat against your young, Kieran said, his voice filled with approval. Royal Lycans are legendary for their protective instincts. There are stories of blackthorn mothers who could track threats across continents and destroy entire armies to protect their children. His expression grew serious. But with great power comes great responsibility. If you choose to awaken fully, there's no going back. What do you mean? Seraphina asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. You mean I'll stop being human entirely? Kieran nodded. The transformation isn't just physical, it's fundamental. You'll see the world differently, feel emotions more intensely, be connected to supernatural forces in ways that will change everything about how you experience life. But you'll also be strong enough to protect your children from anything, Raven added. Strong enough to stand as Kieran's equal, to help lead the pack, to ensure Luna and Orion grow up free and powerful instead of caged and controlled. She paused meaningfully. The choice is yours, but you should know, your awakening has already begun. The question is whether you'll guide it or let it happen randomly. Seraphina moved to the couch where her children sat, kneeling in front of them and taking their small hands in hers. What do you think? She asked seriously. Do you want a mother who's human, or one who's like you? Luna and Orion exchanged one of those wordless communications that twins were famous for, then Luna spoke for both of them. We want a mother who can protect us, she said simply. We want a mother who's not afraid of what we are. Orion nodded solemnly. We want you to be our pack leader, not just our mama. The trust in their young faces, the acceptance of something they didn't fully understand but recognized as necessary, made Seraphina's decision for her. Then I choose awakening, she said, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was committing to. I choose power, protection, and whatever it takes to keep my children safe. She looked up at Kieran, seeing her future reflected in his golden eyes. I choose the extraordinary life, even if it means leaving my humanity behind. The children, she said suddenly, practical concerns crashing through the romantic haze despite everything they'd just discovered. If you're really what you say you are, if there are others like you who want to hurt you, what does that mean for Luna and Orion? Kieran's expression grew fierce, protective. It means they'll have the protection of the entire Pacific Northwest pack. It means any wolf who wants to hurt them will have to go through me first. It means they'll grow up knowing they're safe, loved, and valued. And Marcus? The name felt bitter on her tongue, but she had to ask. Kieran's eyes flashed gold. Marcus is a threat to what's mine. In the wolf world, that's settled only one way. The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her, but Seraphina found herself feeling something else entirely, relief. For the first time since she'd left her ex-husband, she didn't feel like she was facing the danger alone. You'd really fight him? Risk your life for people you've known less than a week? But even as she asked, she realized the question was different now. They hadn't known each other for a week, they'd been destined for each other across centuries, their bloodlines intertwined by forces beyond human understanding. Kieran's answer came without hesitation. I'd die for you. For them. That's what the mate bond means. Your happiness, your safety, your children's well-being all matter more to me than my own life. He pulled back slightly, studying her face with new reverence. But now I understand why the bond formed so quickly, so completely. You're not just my mate, Seraphina, you're my equal in every way that matters. The question is whether you can accept this world, accept me, accept yourself, he continued, his voice gentle but serious. Because once you choose this path, there's no going back to your normal human life. Seraphina thought about the life she'd been living, struggling, afraid, constantly looking over her shoulder. Then she thought about the way Kieran made her feel, protected, valued, alive. But now she also thought about the power stirring in her chest, the potential to become something greater than she'd ever imagined. I stopped having a normal life the day I married Marcus, she said quietly, but her voice carried a new strength, a new certainty. Maybe it's time I claimed the extraordinary one I was always meant to have. As she spoke, she felt that warmth in her chest expand, spreading through her body like liquid fire. This was her awakening, her transformation, her rebirth into the supernatural royalty she'd always been. And looking at Kieran's face, seeing the love and pride and absolute devotion in his golden eyes, Seraphina knew she was finally, truly coming home. Chapter 6, The Final Hunt. Friday night arrived with storm clouds gathering over Seattle, the air electric with the promise of lightning. Kieran had spent the day making arrangements, calling his pack, setting up protective perimeters, ensuring Luna and Orion were safe with trusted wolves who would guard them with their lives. Absolutely not, Seraphina had said when he suggested she stay behind too. Marcus wants me there. If I don't show, he'll know something's wrong, and he'll hurt innocent people to draw me out. Kieran had argued, paced, and growled, but ultimately agreed. His mate was right, Marcus was too dangerous to give any tactical advantage. The meeting place Marcus had chosen was the abandoned warehouse district near the waterfront, a maze of empty buildings and broken dreams that felt like a perfect setting for nightmares. Seraphina arrived first, her heart hammering but her spine straight. She'd learned during her marriage that showing fear only made men like Marcus more dangerous. When his SUV pulled up, disgorging Marcus and 3 other men, she forced herself to stand tall. You came, Marcus said, genuine surprise in his voice. I wasn't sure you had the courage. I came to tell you in person that it's over, Seraphina said, her voice carrying across the empty space between them. I'm not coming back, Marcus. I'm not afraid of you anymore. Marcus's laugh was ugly, designed to humiliate. You think your new boyfriend can protect you? Let me show you how wrong you are. He gestured to his companions, who began spreading out to surround her. But before they could complete their formation, shadows began moving in the darkness beyond the warehouse lights. Kieran emerged from the shadows like vengeance given form, no longer bothering to hide his true nature. His eyes blazed gold in the darkness, his movements were predatorily fluid, and the 3 wolves flanking him were even more obviously inhuman. Marcus's companions took one look at the approaching pack and ran, their bravado evaporating like morning mist. But Marcus himself stood his ground, too arrogant to recognize the danger he was facing. So this is your new man, he sneered. Doesn't look like much. Looks can be deceiving, Kieran said, his voice carrying the authority of an alpha addressing a rival. He stopped just outside of Marcus's reach, positioning himself between the human man and Seraphina. You threatened my mate and her children. In my world, that demands a response. Marcus pulled a gun from his jacket, pointing it at Kieran with shaking hands. In my world, freaks like you don't get to have opinions. The bullet hit Kieran in the shoulder, spinning him around but not dropping him. When he straightened, his smile was all fangs. "In my world," he said, his voice dropping to a growl that made the windows of the warehouse vibrate, "men who hurt women and children don't live long enough to regret it." The fight was over in seconds. Marcus, for all his bluster and violence, was just a human man facing a supernatural predator. Kieran didn't kill him. Seraphina suspected that decision was a gift to her, an acknowledgement that she'd have to live with whatever happened next. Instead, he left Marcus alive but broken, crawling away into the night with a clear understanding that any further contact with Seraphina or her children would be his last mistake. "It's finished," Kieran said, pulling Seraphina into his arms as sirens wailed in the distance. "You're free." 3 months later, Seraphina stood in the kitchen of Kieran's sprawling house in the mountains outside Seattle, watching Luna and Orion play with wolf cubs in the backyard. The pack had accepted them immediately, treating the twins like precious gifts and Seraphina like the alpha's mate she was becoming. She wore Kieran's ring now, not a wedding band yet, but a promise that they would have time to build something real together. The children had adjusted to their new life with the resilience of youth, asking matter-of-fact questions about werewolves and accepting the answers with the same ease they'd once accepted explanations about why the sky was blue. "Any regrets?" Kieran asked, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Seraphina leaned back against his solid warmth, marveling at how safe she felt in his embrace. "Only that I wasted so many years being afraid," she said honestly. "I should have been braver sooner." Kieran pressed a kiss to the curve of her neck, and she felt his smile against her skin. "You were exactly as brave as you needed to be, when you needed to be. Everything happened the way it was supposed to." As evening approached, the pack gathered for their weekly family dinner, 24 werewolves of all ages sharing food, stories, and laughter around Kieran's massive dining room table. Luna and Orion sat between their favorite wolves, chattering about school and asking if they could learn to howl properly. Seraphina watched her children bloom in this environment of unconditional acceptance and protection, their eyes bright with joy instead of fear. This was what family was supposed to feel like, she realized. Not control masquerading as love, but genuine care that asked for nothing in return except happiness. But as the pack settled in for the evening, Kieran's phone buzzed with an urgent message. His expression darkened as he read, and Seraphina felt familiar ice creep up her spine. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Kieran showed her the screen, a photo of Luna and Orion at school, taken from a distance, with a message that made her blood freeze. "The children smell like wolf now." "Interesting. We know what you took from us, Alpha. Now we'll take something from you. The Council of Ancients has voted. Your human mate and her cubs have 7 days to leave pack territory, or we'll remove them ourselves." For the first time, Lily felt safe in Kieran's arms. But in the shadows of the supernatural world, another pair of ancient eyes had already chosen her fate.